this feature.
Those are parents.
Yeah, and I think these two. It was like right in this region right here. Nameplate.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
You shouldn't have done that.
I didn't. All right. I mean to say, you're welcome.
Now if I can remember
Genius. You're hired.
Thank you.
All right, what is this?
An SBA.
No, I know it. Yeah. What is this device?
This is a bit of a problem, which depending on what could get left out, it could change the meaning significantly, I think.
I think it's a sticky pad, or you put stuff on like your iPhone, I guess, or something. That's what it's supposed to be.
Oh, okay.
At first, I thought it was an ice scraper.
An ice scraper.
Which is kind of ironic.
Yeah, we need one.
We do.
Oh. We haven't had this bad. I think 77, 78 was the last time I remember this bad. My kids were in school.
Well, I do have that one. Yes. And how much you spend
Growing my smooth silk skin.
I'd like to welcome you to the February 10th meeting of the Jefferson County Board of Education. Prior to this meeting, the board conducted work sessions where we heard an update on the OCR report and the response data, a report on teacher recruitment, training, and support, and an update on the professional growth and effectiveness system. We're going to have a moment of silence, and then we'll stand for the pledge, and after that, Vice Chair Jones will do the vision statement. So if we could have a moment of silence, please. Please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The vision of the Jefferson County Public Schools is that all JCPS students graduate prepared to reach their full potential and contribute to our society throughout life.
Thank you. We'll move on to the minutes of the January 27th meeting. Ms. Duncan?
I have an amendment that I would like to make to the amendments, or to the minutes, and I would like for my comments to be included in the minutes. My comments concerning the suspension and discipline report.
Okay. So hearing that, we're going to add the comments from Ms. Duncan from the last January 27th meeting. Is there a motion to approve the minutes, please? Mr. Brady, second. Ms. Westland, all those in favor? Motion passes unanimously, and Board Member Hathaway is ill tonight and unable to be with us, so thank you very much. There are no recognitions and resolutions tonight. We're going to move on with a motion to kind of conduct business like we did last time. So, Mr. Jones.
Okay, I move to waive Board Policy 1.45, Board Meeting Agenda, and amend the agenda to move discussion item 7A up to this point in the agenda.
Okay, is there a second? Mr. Brady? All those in favor? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. So what we will do is that under the discussion item, the report on extended learning, priority schools, and schools using the transformation option. Dr. Hargens, if you would introduce the presentation, please.
Thank you, Chair Porter. Carl Sandburg once said, "Time is the most valuable coin of life. You determine how that coin is spent. Be careful that you do not let other people spend it for you." We've spent a lot of time in a work session talking about how do you make up for lost time when students are suspended, but more importantly, how do you prevent the time lost to instruction on students being suspended. But this item really is about a commitment that our Board of Education made to add extended learning opportunities to our students. So when a student doesn't know something, and learning is the constant, we want every student to be able to learn the standards. When they haven't learned it, this is an opportunity for them to get targeted, extended time to be able to learn it. So Dr. Dossett will walk us through not only extended learning, but an update of our priority schools. Dr. Dossett.
Thank you, and good evening. I'd like to begin by talking a little bit about the school improvement grant and a review of those intervention models, talk about some differences between the intervention models that our schools have adopted and the progress that they've made so far in the implementation of those intervention models, talk a little bit about the support systems that we have in place for our priority schools, and then spend some time talking about the extended learning time opportunities at our priority schools. So the School Improvement Grant was a federal initiative that provided funds to schools and districts to improve student achievement. And as part of that grant, schools were required to implement one of 4 intervention models: a turnaround, which we also call restaffing in Kentucky, restart, closure, and transformation. We had 18 JCPS schools identified as priority schools over the last few years, 6 from Cohort 1, 7 Cohort 2 schools, and then most recently 5 Cohort 3 schools. And the Cohort 1 schools now have been implementing for 3 years, Cohort 2 for 2, and then Cohort 1, 12-13 was their first year of implementation. And you can see the federal funding attached with each of those grants. There is a new grant opportunity for our Cohort 3 schools that's due at the end of this month, and so we'll be working on that application now. And then KDE, the Kentucky Department of Education, also provides assistance through access to education recovery leaders for principals, and then education recovery specialists in the areas of literacy and math that are available and work closely with our teachers in our priority schools. So I'm going to talk mostly about the 2 intervention models that our schools have adopted. 14 have adopted the turnaround or restaffing model. All of our Cohort 1 and Cohort 2 schools adopted turnaround. And then Thomas Jefferson and our Cohort 3 adopted turnaround. And then we've got 4 Cohort 3 schools that have adopted transformation. And there's quite a few required components of these 2 turnaround models. Some of the common requirements across the models include use of student data, providing professional development, implementing a new instructional program. But in terms of the key differences among these 2 models, there's the turnaround or restaffing model requires schools to replace at least 50% of their instructional staff. If they've been hired as part of a reform effort, they can be included in those numbers. And then another difference is to provide social, emotional, or community-oriented services for students. The transformation intervention model actually follows closely our work that we're doing with the professional growth and effectiveness system that you heard about in our work session today. So it's really around using evaluations that include student growth as an evaluation component, implementing strategies to recruit, retain, and effective staff, and identifying and rewarding staff that are improving student achievement and offering support to those teachers or staff that may not, and remove them if necessary, and then also to provide mechanisms for family and community engagement. So when we look at each of the outcomes for each of our cohort schools, for cohort 1, and this chart shows each of the 5 accountability components. We have achievement, gap, growth, college and career readiness, graduation rate, overall score, or whether they made their AMO, and their percentile rank. So these are the first group of schools. So they've had 3 years of implementation, and you can see overall 5 of the 6 schools have improved their overall score and have met their AMO. And 3 of the 6 schools have moved above the 5th percentile. And in order to exit priority status, you have to meet AMO for 3 years, have a graduation rate above 70%, and be above the 5th percentile. So we're seeing a lot of progress with our first cohort of schools that have been implementing the model the longest. Our cohort 2 schools, again, we've got the 5 areas of the accountability model, and just looking at last year's to this year's scores, which are the 2 years of the new accountability model, 6 out of the 7 cohort 2 schools improved their overall score and met their AMO, and 5 out of 7 have moved out of the 5th percentile. So again, we're seeing really good progress with our cohort 2 schools as well. Sure.
Sorry to interrupt, but 5th percentile, where on that chart is that, which column does that refer to?
It's the last 2 columns on the right-hand side that say rank. So that's their percentile rank in 2012 and their percentile rank in 2013. And then our cohort 3 schools, and again, they've just been implementing this. 12-13 was their first year of implementation, and we've got 5 cohorts, 3 schools, 3 of which improved their overall score. And we had 2 meet AMO and 1 move above the 5th percentile. So, and those are the schools that have been implementing the least amount of time, and with the least amount of resources and funding attached to those schools as well. The Kentucky Board of Education received a report last week outlining the progress of the priority schools statewide. And so I just wanted to pull some of the highlights from that report that the Kentucky Board of Education received last week. Some areas of success that we've seen. 2 of our schools were categorized as high progress. 11 of the 18 were categorized as progressing. We had 5 schools show growth for more than 50% of their students. 9 out of the 10 high schools made gains in their college and career readiness rates. 13 schools made their AMO, and 9 schools moved out of the bottom 5%. So that's half of our priority schools are now out of the bottom 5%. On the flip side, areas for improvement, we have only 3 schools that have scores at or above the state average in gap or growth. 11 schools made little or no gain in percentile rank, and the state defined that as a gain of 6% or more. And then 9 schools remain in the bottom 5%. So while we've moved half of our priority schools out of the bottom 5%, we still have half of the schools in the bottom 5%. We also, so that gives you an idea of their progress on the accountability model and state accountability test. We also provide quarterly reports to monitor and track our progress, informative measures throughout the year. So we provide reports to the Kentucky Department of Education in October, December, March, and June in areas of attendance for both staff and student, retentions, graduation rates, K-Prep test scores, reading interventions, math interventions, CCR rates. Quite a bit of data goes into those reports, and they're available on our website as well. In terms of what types of support systems that we have in place for our priority schools, they're really centered, our delivery plans are centered around 4 main areas. Expanded resources, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes, but one example of that would be the extended time and learning opportunities that we've provided for those 18 schools. Coaching and monitoring plans, so we have our quarterly reports that we check in progress 4 times a year, but we also have weekly meetings with the assistant superintendents, the academic support and services, curriculum and instruction, as well as Dr. Powers, who's our education recovery director, where we spend a focused amount of time talking about the needs and progress of our priority schools and what we can do to support them better. Professional growth and effectiveness system, we heard about that at our work session, but all of our priority schools receive training from the state on the PGIS system, and in fact we use a lot of that state training to model our district training for all of the rest of our schools. And then all of the priority schools are involved with PBIS, and as part of their reports that they have to provide to KDE as a behavior intervention support plan that they have for their students. So now turning to talk a little bit more about that top area around expanded resources. Wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about extended learning time in our priority schools. And basically this is an update of the data that we have so far for the first 3 months. We have an additional group of schools that are joining in January, that have joined this past January, but this is focused in on our priority schools and the first 3 months of implementation. So in terms of participation rate, altogether we have 5,252 students involved. We have more high school students than middle school. And then in terms of hours of participation, we have a total just for the first 3 months of 51,654 hours of extended time that our students have received as part of this program. The average number of hours was 7.7 hours at high school and 19.5 hours at the middle school. So if you look at the 2 charts, you basically see some differences in approach between the middle school and the high school. The high school are targeting more students, so they've got about 40% of their students in their buildings participating in this program. Middle schools is 17%, but middle schools have a higher number of hours that those so they've got smaller number of kids, more time. High school, more students, less time. So just a slight difference in the approach that they're providing. In terms of the demographics of the students that we're serving, it's very similar to, it mirrors the population in those priority schools. We've got 78% of the students participating on free and reduced lunch. We have 46% African American, 41% white, 8% Hispanic, and 5% other. So the demographics of the students participating really mirrors the demographics of the kids in those buildings. In terms of other data around the kids that they're targeting, previous academic performance. So this is where they performed before we implemented this program on the state accountability system from last year. So overall, 54% of the kids that are participating were novice, and 75% were novice or apprentice. We also had 43% average growth percentile, and the state average is 60% showing growth. So again, these are students that are typically not at proficiency and are not showing those same growth rates that we need to stay on track. But that's for reading. For math, the same type. 83% of our students that are being targeted and served were novice or apprentice, so not reaching those proficiency levels. And again, 43% at the growth percentile, where we're shooting for the 60%. Number of teacher participants, we had 439 total teachers participating, and quite a bit of student contact hours for those particular teachers. What they're spending their time focusing on during this extended time, at the middle school level, we have a lot of focus on English, language arts, and math. So I think overall what we had was about, let me double check, but we had about 90% of their time was spent on reading and math only. And then you can see additional time on science, social studies, and the other content areas. In high school, again, we're talking about a broader group of students that are participating, so a lot more students than at the middle school level, but they're spending their time in multiple different areas. So again, the biggest area is English and math, but you also see other content areas. So overall, for the accountability areas, English, math, science, social studies, career, tech, and ACT or CCR rates, about 72% of their hours are spent on those 5 components of the accountability model. We also have people from the data management office, our unit, collaborating with the people from the curriculum and instruction department to go out and do site visits and talk with the teachers and students participating in the program to see what's working and what's not working. They've done some site visits. They have more lined up for the next couple of weeks, so we can bring back another progress report in a couple months to let you know where we stand as of the end of the year. And overall, in terms of students that are taking advantage of transportation in order to participate, we had about 58% of our students being transported in order to participate. So that was a very quick overview. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer any.
Ms. Duncan?
I want to back up a little bit before I have some questions on this, but let me ask you about on the where we use the turnaround models and the information on transformation model. What measures are we using to measure student growth in that model? Are we giving pre-test, post-test in classes, or are we using K-Prep 1 year and then the following year K-Prep growth? How are we measuring growth?
That's a good question. And so what we're doing with the schools that are implementing the transformation model is we're really trying to follow the professional growth and effectiveness system. So what we set up with the original MOU with JCTA that we submitted to the Kentucky Department of Education is that we would follow the PGIS system when we're implementing the transformation model. So part of that student growth will be student growth is defined by reading and math, those growth percentiles that we talked about on the K-Prep. But another part of it for those teachers that don't teach reading and math would be work that we're doing around setting student growth goals and how we're going to measure that. So I'm part of the team that's going down, or the part of the team that's working on PGIS is getting trained in student growth measures and how to set those and facilitate conversations with the schools on setting those in a couple weeks. So we're going to be learning more about student growth at that point.
I know we're supposed to improve or reward improvement, but have we settled on what that improvement is or what it really means? Does it mean teacher to child improvement? So a teacher could possibly improve with this one, not improve with this one, improve with this one, not improve with this one. Or does it mean school-wide, where if you have school-wide average or a school-wide growth, then the school is rewarded?
That's built in as part of the MOU is looking at school-wide growth.
School-wide.
So that's part of that MOU that we've established with JCTA. And again, we're because we're following the PGIS system and that's being rolled out and piloted now, we're still at the beginning stages of some of that work.
Okay, very good. And if I have some more questions on the other part, but I'll let other people.
Ms. Westland?
Just want to ask about the extended learning, and when do you think you'll know something about how we feel about the effectiveness of it overall, and whether we're going to consider doing it again or expanding it? Has there been any discussion about that?
Well, in terms of looking at student outcomes, there's a couple of ways that we can approach that. One is to look at more of the formative measures along the way. So our benchmark assessments that we use through our internal cascade process, we monitor that. But in terms of whether it leads to student improvement as defined on the state accountability test, we won't be able to measure that and really have a clear answer of that until probably October. So we can provide implementation updates and more qualitative data around teacher perceptions, student perceptions of how it's working, but in terms of improving student outcomes on the state accountability, it won't be until October.
That's another one of those things on our resource list, to look at for next year, because it sounds like you've got it down just now, how to deliver it. And if it's going to make some gains, it's probably going to need to be continued. And I don't want to have to, wait till fall. So anyway, just wanted to get that on our plate. So.
Mr. Jones.
I'd like to follow up on Ms. Westland's question and your response. It looks like we've got the right students coming for extended day, the novices and the ones who have a lot of ground to gain. But what can we know from the formative assessments, and when can we know it? When we decide on what the funding mechanism is going to be in the summer, we're going to need some predictive model or something to base our decision on.
Right. So right now, schools have finished their third proficiency assessments in reading and math, and so we can pull that data and have that available. Right. We have done some analysis in the past of how well our cascade or internal benchmarking assessments correlates and predicts our state accountability, and those correlations are quite high, so we can have at least a relatively sound idea about how we'll do on the state accountability system, looking at those.
Put aside the state accountability for a moment and just talk about the diagnostic value of, how can the people who are doing this work get feedback to know whether we're not only getting the right students, but moving them along and back toward where they need to be, so that, because we won't have the state testing in time.
And so one of the ways that they monitor student progress is those formative assessments, those benchmarks assessments in Cascade. There's also each school has set up other ways that they measure progress. So depending on what the course is or that extra time is spent on, they have different ways to track student growth. And in fact, I've got some examples from a few schools where they have provided that where the students set goals for themselves and teachers have conversations with them and they monitor their progress as part of that time. So they set goals for themselves and check on that on a regular basis. So each school has developed their own internal way of checking for progress, and then for consistency purposes at the district level, we can look at those district level assessments to check on progress.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Brady, and then Ms. Duncan.
Just to follow up on Board Member Jones's request, you said you can get that information to us when?
For the third proficiency assessment,
Just
we
so
can
we can
provide it in a board update packet, one of those Friday board update packets.
Okay. Are you coming? Are we talking about within the next 2 weeks, or are we going to talk about the next couple months?
No, we can. The third one is the third proficiency assessment has been completed, so we can get that to you within the next 2 weeks.
Just want to make sure, because sometimes we can get that information to you, but I don't know a date, and we're going to need to know that information as Board Member Jones talked about regarding when we're going to make a decision as to whether or not what type of funding we should continue with this particular program.
Sure.
Thank you.
Ms. Duncan.
I noticed the average high school is 7.7 and average middle school is 19, or 19.5, I guess. And total possible hours that a child could stay, not that they all have to stay all that time, but total possible hours would be 72. Is that right? If you figure 3 sessions a week, 2 hours, and 4 weeks and 3 months.
Right, if they're staying for 3 hours, or 3 sessions a week for 2 hours. Each school has it set up slightly different in terms of their schedules. So,
I wonder what the high schools are doing that if there's more contact with parents at the high school level to get kids to stay than at the middle school level. I know we have a few who are attending more, but I'm sure there would be more who could benefit from that. And I wonder what the high schools are doing that is creating or generating a better attendance like that.
well, I think one of the things that they're doing, if we look at what they're focusing in on, middle schools really narrow the focus to reading and math specifically. High school has a little bit more content that they're covering. They have some clubs or some other activities besides reading and math that I think are drawing students to stay, and then they're adding the reading and math on top of that. But it might be some of those other content areas that pique their interest more.
You know, when I looked at those numbers, Dina, it looked to me like we had more kids staying for non-academic things, more hours there than with academic things. And it was just that on middle school, it was considerably different. I mean, it was all academic, I think, with exception of just a few hours. But when I looked at it, I didn't see that. So I'm going to have to go back and look at that again, because it looked like to me more time for non-academic than for academic. And
Well, if we look at the high school content here, the number of hours just in English and language arts, it's 9,416. So when I calculated the 70% on the academic areas, I was looking at English, math, science, social studies, career tech, and ACT, and so those comprised about 70% of the hours at the high school level.
All righty. Another question I had was about how much we have spent so far. We've said 439 teachers, I think, that have taken part in this. How much, do you have an idea of how much we've spent thus far on those teachers and how much we've spent on transportation?
So in terms of how much of the $5 million that was originally allocated,
right.
$600,000 has been encumbered for the extended time, and of the $2.5 million in transportation, about $500,000 has been spent for transportation. Okay. So we still have money to spend at this point, but that was for the first 3 months of the program.
All righty. And then just one other question about, are we noticing if there is any impact on attendance? We know when kids are staying longer periods of time, they're staying after longer days. Do we notice anything in the attendance of the schools where they're staying? Is it about the same?
That's a great question. We'll be able to provide that in the update when we provide the proficiency assessments. We'll make sure that we include information about attendance and what kind of impact this has had on attendance. That's a good question.
All righty. Well, thank you very much.
Go ahead. Mr. Jones.
Okay. Sorry, I want to follow up on one of Ms. Duncan's comments. Could you explain that community/social skills service activities? I mean, I'm really struck by a category that looks non-academic that has by far the greatest hours per student in it, and I don't know what it is, but I'm not sure that's what we meant to fund. Can you explain that?
I can give you more detailed information by school of how they've this is just an aggregate across all schools, so we can break that down for you and give you specifics about that. But I think a lot of that might be service learning opportunities that might not be categorized as math and science, but might overlap.
Okay, but I guess I'd like in your response that you or whoever responds specifically address, is this going at academic improvement of the students through extended learning? Because that's what we funded. We did not mean to fund other things that may be also important and wonderful, but specifically this was about math, reading, the things that the students have to get in order to go on to be ready for the rest of their lives.
Sure. We'll give you specific examples
you.
of what that looks like.
I just have one quick question. As we talk about transportation, so all the schools that need to have this opportunity for their students, there are no barriers so that every student should be able to stay for extended time, and we have provided bus service for every student that needs to participate in the extended learning opportunity. And I ask because over the weekend someone said to me that some relative had been staying after and now they weren't because there was not bus service. So I just want to make sure that we say that the bus service is available. Is that correct? Am I hearing you say that?
Yes, that is correct. The
Okay.
bus service is available, and that's one of the survey questions that we're asking the staff and the schools as we do our site visits, is around transportation and the access of transportation for all students.
Are there needs that we have not met? I mean, as you're surveying and talking about things that students need to be successful in order to take advantage of the extended learning opportunity, is there anything that we have not provided for student success?
I think at this point, the schools feel really pretty comfortable in the programs that they're running, and so it took a little while to get off the ground, but now they're really making momentum and moving forward. So I think they've worked through some of those initial maybe implementation barriers that they had at the beginning to really moving forward in the second semester.
Okay, thank you. Are there other questions? Okay, no other questions. So at this time, is there a motion to receive the report? Ms. Duncan, second. Mr. Brady. All those in favor? Unanimous. Thank you very much, Dr. Dawson. We will go back to, on the agenda, to the consent calendar and the superintendent's report. Dr. Hargens.
Thank you, Chair Porter and members of the board. It's my pleasure to call to your attention a few items of special interest. The overall focus for the next 8 board meetings, and that's the number of board meetings we have in the 13-14 school year, is really the emphasis is to examine current systems and structures that really support increased learning. So that includes the 2 topics today that were discussed at the work session. One of them was the system we have in place to provide a safe and orderly learning environment and prevent valuable instruction time being lost to suspensions. The second was the professional growth and effectiveness system. This is very impactful because it gives a common understanding of effective teaching and ways to support teacher growth. And also, there is also an instrument for principal and superintendent growth and effectiveness. Our system review in the next 8 meetings will also include a review of magnet and alternative school programs. Magnet Schools of America reviewers visited our system last week. They came from Florida, North Carolina, Minnesota, Connecticut, California, and Washington, D.C., and we'll be bringing that report to the board in late March. We will also bring forth an aligned technology and facilities plan. I want to remind you that the time between the draft budget, where we looked at our estimated revenues and expenditures, and the tentative budget is important because it is being used to examine how we're going to align our dollars to our priorities that will ultimately result in increased learning. So, Chair Porter, at this time, I recommend the consent calendar for the board's consideration.
Okay, and before I ask for consent calendar questions, on the piece about the magnet review, WeatherDip was not our friend last week, so were they able to see all the schools, or what's the process?
Well, actually, there are 2 reviewers, isn't that right, Dr. Radowski, coming back in the next 2 weeks to make sure that they get all the site visits in, because they did surveys and they did site visits and collected information. So 2 reviewers will come back because of the weather.
Thank you. Items from the consent calendar. Mr. Brady.
Item T.
Other items. Ms. Duncan.
M and U.
M and U. Was
U.
it? Okay, thank you. Other items? Okay, we'll start with item M, which is the acceptance of donations. Ms. Duncan?
Well, I just wanted to point out, and with appreciation, the donation that was made to Valley High School in their auditorium, that grand piano for their concert piano for the stage. It's a $5,500 donation from Neil Allen, and how much I know I appreciate that, and I'm sure the rest of us do too.
Okay, thank you. The next item is T, the approval to modify a fully depreciated JCPS school bus into a mobile cafeteria. Mr. Brady?
Yes, this really isn't a question about the actual, making this modification, except for I'd like to add a request to this particular item and also see if we might be able to look into retrofitting our existing bus. And the fact that, and I made this a recommendation once before when we toured the bus. By the way, this is a great idea. You all have great kudos for doing this. I think it's a valuable community resource. One of the things I'd like to do to modify that and actually make it a little bit more valuable to the community is for you all to put Wi-Fi capability on this bus. And the reason I asked for that is twofold. One, we're having a more interconnected community, and day by day, more people are getting online. But also, more importantly, in the event that we have some type of disaster event, tornado, some other event like that, then I think it'll be a valuable resource to the community, because one of the first things that our community would need will be access to communication. Food is an important part of that as well, but actually access to communications is the priority number one. And I think this is a way to be able to provide both of those items. And so it's something that I'd like the superintendent and our director of operations to look at, including on this new proposed modified bus, but also if we can try and retrofit our existing bus. And then that way, along with App Mobile, they'll give us 3 mobile wireless access points in our fleet, as far as I know, unless we have more.
Ms. Duncan?
I would like to know how much that would cost too. I know this particular bus, cost more to create a mobile cafe out of than the other one that we did. So if we're looking at how to do that, I would really like to know how much that might cost too.
We're going to have to come back to you with that, but if tonight, if I might ask, or looks like Board Member Brady might know.
I actually asked that question. I think it's about $500, but but that was just a off-the-cuff answer that I was given at the time.
But what we could do is, if you wanted to go ahead and approve this evening, we'd come back with the cost for the Wi-Fi.
Any other questions about that item? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. Is there a motion to approve the consent calendar? Mr. Brady?
Oh, wait a minute. Item U.
Have you?
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You, I apologize.
That's all right. This concerns our policies, and there was one part I wanted to point out, because I think there's been sometimes a misconception out there about what kids can do when they're 16 years old right now, and I've heard so many times it said that kids can take themselves out of school at 16, and that's not the case. And if you look at the policy on withdrawal, it says a written permission for withdrawal shall be required from the parent, guardian, or other person residing in the state and having custody or charge of the student before the unmarried student may withdraw. In cases of withdrawal, it has required the parent's signature, and we have had parents who have been willing to sign their kids out at age 16. And now that we have the dropout age moving up to 18, that will no longer be the case. They won't be able to give their permission. It won't solve the situation of a student telling a parent that I want to withdraw and the parent going along with that. It won't solve the control issue there, but it will be a different situation for us. And no student can just take himself out of school just because he turns 16 and says, oh, okay, I'm going to quit school now. It has to be a parent approving that. And I think people have just thought, well, that's why that law needs to be changed. Well, no kid can decide at 16. The kid didn't decide. The parent decided. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Duncan. That's a valuable point to make for everyone to hear, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, is there a motion to approve the consent calendar? Ms. Westland, second. Mr. Jones, all those in favor? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Moving on to our action item, which is the approval of modifications to the 2013-14 and 2014-15 school calendars. Dr. Hargens.
Thank you, Chair Porter. I'm a big believer in stay the course and do what you said you were going to do. But in the face of changing circumstances outside of our control, I asked the calendar committee to relook at the makeup days based on feedback from the community and bring back a recommendation. So Dr. Razor is going to present the recommendation of the calendar committee. Dr. Razor.
As Dr. Hargan said, last Monday the calendar committee met and we discussed several different options. Before that, I just want to give some really brief background to put things into context. Since the year 2000, the most snow days that we've missed in a school year are 10. And actually, those really don't qualify as snow days because 5 of those days were one straight week in September when the hurricane came through. And then technically the other could be an anomaly when in late January, early February, an ice storm came through. So we missed 10 days in 2 sets of 5. Typically we miss, if we miss days, 4 days. Since the year 2000, in 2001, 2002, 2005, 2006, and 2007, there were no snow days whatsoever. The reason we have 10 makeup days in our calendar right now is because state statute says that you must put the maximum amount that you have missed within the last 5 years into your calendar. So that's the reason that we have days just stacked onto the end of our calendar because we're mandated because of that. This is really unprecedented winter weather. So having said that, and having met with the calendar committee, the recommendation of the calendar committee was that we use February 24th and 25th as makeup days, with a couple of reasons being really, really the main two. We have teachers at all level, especially elementary, who are asking for some uninterrupted instruction. There have been very few weeks since Thanksgiving where a teacher has gotten 5 days in a row with their class. And as the parent of a 5th grader, I know how off schedule everything has gotten. At the high school level, there's another concern. Although state testing continues to back up as the school year backs up, AP testing is a line in the sand. And every day we miss in school is one less day that the AP teachers get to prepare their students for the AP exams. And even though these are only 2 school days we're talking about, they're 2 very valuable school days. The cons that were brought up that were against doing this were all of us, and including yourselves, have received letters and emails from people who do have plans over this time because they were non-school days. And it was really the sentiment of the calendar committee, although it has no jurisdiction over this, that is, if we could show some flexibility with those families and even employees in some cases who had travel already planned or commitments already made. From an academic sense, even as Dr. Hargan said, we believe in staying the course. We believe in carrying out a plan. Sometimes you have to readjust. And in this case, at the time, we thought we were going to be protecting a Friday, June 6th. In that time, since then, we've already missed 2 more days and had 1 early dismissal. So as it currently stands, we're making up 8 days. We've delayed school 3 times. We've dismissed school early once. And we're in a situation where we have 1 more delay left before we would have to start making that up. And as you know, we make up every snow day that we do miss. I'd be happy to entertain any questions you might have. Yes.
Ms. Duncan?
Had a question about banked minutes. What do we think we have right now in terms of banked minutes that we can apply to these things?
In speaking with the representatives of KDE today who oversee this type of thing, really the way a school year has to be set up, and there's a little bit of a lesson to this, and I apologize, I've kind of got to digress on this. You must have at least 170 days. You must have at least a 6-hour school day, and you must also have 1,062 minutes. So our school day is 6 hours and 10 minutes long. If you add that up over 175 school days, that gives us a little over 19 hours extra, which if you divided 19 hours out is about 3 school days. And really that's the latitude that we've been given right now. So our first 2-hour delays that we called, the state also has 5 forgiveness hours is what they call them. And we basically expired all of our extended hours with those 2-hour delays. Now we basically have 3 more because of that banked time that we have.
Do we intend to use that banked time, or are we going to save that for more delays?
The way it was explained to me today, that banked time cannot be used to make up a full day. It can be used in the instances where we don't go a full day.
Okay.
Mr. Jones?
You've mentioned the calendar committee. Could you explain what is the calendar committee, who is on it, and why does it have any particular authority over this matter?
I'd be glad to. The calendar committee is in JCPS policy that we have a calendar committee made up of representatives from every board district that are appointed by board members. The superintendent has appointed me as designee of that. We have representatives from all community stakeholders, from all of our employee groups, as well as different central office departments and divisions that deal with the school day.
How many people are on it, approximately?
Well over 30.
So it's meant to be a representative composed of community representatives and stakeholders within the district to kind of take the community's temperature.
Absolutely.
When we make these decisions about how to adjust to unexpected weather conditions.
Yes.
Thanks.
One other point I realized I didn't make. We also are proposing an edit to the calendar for next year for 14-15, and that would be to go ahead right now and put the Professional Development Day and Parent-Teacher Conference Day on the table as potential makeup days. They would not, if we have a typical winter next year and we miss 1 or 2 days, those wouldn't be the first 2 days that we would take. But if we got into 3, 4, 5 snow days, then those would be available.
Ms. Duncan?
You know, I'm really having trouble making this adjustment to taking 24 and 25 as instructional days, because we were so careful to create the calendar with some days in it, and then we put the makeup days on the end, and we gave that to people, and we did that. We said we wanted to give them something more predictable, and we did. We gave them something more predictable. But now we immediately switch. And I know people do make plans around these calendars, and I know most of the email that I have received has not been supportive of taking those 2 days. As a matter of fact, most of it has been supportive of the other, of leaving them as they are. And I also worry about the fact that it devalues Parent-Teacher Conference Day, and I feel like it devalues it, and it devalues the Professional Development Day, which is so important for getting teachers together to have the time to plan and make adjustments in the instructional plans that they have. So I'm really having a lot of trouble with this particular recommendation, and I think I'm going to not support this. I mean, everybody else has reasons, and even the AP argument, I know those kids are probably the most capable ones to absorb a loss of instructional time. So I just feel if you give them a calendar, you need to pretty much stay with that, especially now since we're going into June on the 9th. That's one day on the 9th, and then I feel like that's going to be a challenge to get everybody there for one day on the 9th, and now we'll probably be going beyond that. So I'm just not ready to make this adjustment on the calendar.
Ms. Westland?
And I understand what Ms. Duncan is saying. I think we've even talked about that, and I think my initial thought was, because we do work very hard on the calendar, and the calendar is never easy. You think you've thought of everything that could happen. I remember saying when we approved this calendar, let's mark those days we're going to use so parents know. Here we are going to consider using 2 days that we said we wouldn't use. But I've become convinced that we probably should make that change because I have heard from teachers, and it is about testing, and some parents as well. And yes, some AP parents, but instruction time is so important. And I think it's not 100% right to take those days back, but it is right for us to focus on what we're supposed to do, and that is instruction. And 2 days right in a row and 5 days then right in a row are good. So I will support it. I would just ask that if that does pass, that we communicate with principals right away. I'm sure we'll be tweeting it right out, and everybody will know quickly, but with instructions on how we want that to develop. And also, I assume, Dr. Hargens, we're going to give principals flexibility or instructions about how they can, because I did hear from some parents who had plane tickets. I knew that's what would happen. There's even a student group, I believe at Ballard, that was going to go on a long weekend school-related trip, and we certainly want to, because they made those reservations with our guarantee that we're now going back on, that we would protect that. But I do think instruction, I think the vast majority of students will be in school and will benefit from that. So I just want to make sure that we communicate well and that we listen to parents and we deal with issues as they come up if this does pass.
Mr. Brady?
I just want to make a couple points here since we're kind of in the process of explaining our vote, it seems to be. First of all, I don't think there's any wrong vote or even right vote for this. We're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place here, and I understand that. And I can tell you that I attended the calendar committee meeting last week on a snow day, ironically enough. And I heard those points of views, and I think the calendar committee at the time made that with the interest, and as Dr. Razor said, of trying to protect us from going 1 week further into June. Well, as of today, that's no longer an option. We're already in June. Even if we we change these 2 days, we're in for June. And there's some pros and some cons about that, and some of the pros about changing that is that it will, if we change these 2 days, then it'll hopefully give our facilities team a little bit more time during the summer to be able to deal with issues. And because we are going to be starting school a week earlier next year, our calendar has changed, and our calendar next year is also isn't designed to have this string of days that's going to be in here like it was this time around. So it's more designed to have these extra makeup days on a Monday or a Friday, to have long weekends as opposed to just one long week when some people are tempted to make plans and tempt fate, as the case might be. But I'll tell you, the last, and I've been going back and forth on this, and I've received lots of emails either way, and weirdly enough, there's some in the community that always want to talk about teachers and saying, oh, well, those teachers want a day off and do whatever. Overwhelmingly, the amount of feedback that I've gotten from the community as far as changing these days are from teachers, primarily because they want another week of uninterrupted instruction time, and they also want to be able to prepare their kids for testing and whatnot. But the last 2 school days that we've missed have really tipped the balance for me. And because, if we're in for a penny, we're in for a pound. To me, it just seems that I have to think about some of the parents that have contacted me that already have non-refundable reservations, and they were working off the good faith of this board that we weren't going to mess with these days. And I heard from a single parent who is in the process of, this is her custody time, and she's going to take her kids to go and visit family. And I've heard from other parents that are talking about that they have an older family that they were going to go visit during this time, and they're not sure if that family's going to be around much longer. For as much as we're talking about preserving instructional time, there's also preserving family time, and it's something. It's a difficult balance. Again, there's no right or wrong answer to this, but I have to be honest with you. I mean, if we're already going to be going into that second week, we're into the second week. Again, the cliche of in for a penny, in for a pound. We're already there.
Ms. Haddad.
Yeah, I think we're all in the same boat. We don't like being here, but I've been here a lot of times, so I guess I'm kind of used to the bumpy ride. We've had to make these changes before when we've told parents one thing, and the weather just didn't help us out, and we had to make changes. 77, 78 comes to mind when we lost about 20, 25 days. So I see both sides of it. The majority I've heard are from people wanting to go on and make up the days. I heard from 4 parents who had made reservations, and I think if this passes, that we need to honor that their kids could be excused if they brought in proof that they had already made those plans. But I think about a lot of those kids that are sitting at home and need to be in school, and they've lost a lot, and they we talk about in the summer how they lose momentum. Well, these school days, they lose momentum if they don't have a week, especially the young ones. They really do. And I know the graduations now are a concern over the years with trying to get Freedom Hall. You listen to everybody and you're really concerned, but what I heard more from teachers that they wanted that time with those kids. And that's what they felt they needed now. And so I tend to vote for it, and it may not go anywhere, but I do think that if it does go, that we sure need to make sure these parents are respected and that they can have excused absences for those kids.
The only comment that I have is that we're not in charge of the weather. We never have been, and we never will be. And this is a winter that we did not expect. But we're here to provide instruction, and we're working on academic success for our students. And if the teachers are saying to us in numbers, large numbers, that they would prefer to have students in class because instructionally it's the best decision for us to make, from this point on, when we do a calendar, I don't know what disclaimer statement we should put on there, but there should be something on there that we're not in charge of the weather. And no matter what, we might think we're pretty smart, but we are not in charge of the weather. So if our goal is to provide instruction and to boost academics, then I would have to go with what the teachers are saying. And I regret for those that have those non-refundable tickets. I mean, that is not what we would want, and maybe individual cases can be heard separately. But if we're in the business of education, then I would have to go with educating the students. Any other comments before I call for the vote? Ms. Westman and Mr. Jones.
Just real quick to confirm on talking to principals, Dr. Hargens, have you all discussed that you would allow there to be flexibility for people who've made plans?
Well, and principals know they have discretion over excused absences.
They'll want to hear from you. They'll want to hear from you, though.
What guidance my office has given so far is that's what we're going to be recommending. However, we didn't want to get out in front of the board. So we basically told them that Tuesday morning they'd be receiving direction if the recommendation passed.
Got that. Okay. The other thing I just want to say before you vote and is just to think this has been a tough few weeks. And Dr. Hargens, I know, has been up. I don't know what time you got up to do this. Dr. Racer, and you've been leading this, and your staff, Rick Capel, I think of him driving around. I think he's maybe driving around now. He probably can't get out of his car.
Yeah, I don't think he goes home.
And communication staff, Ben and Christy, and I'm sure, and Mandy and Sharon, everybody has just worked so hard on this, and you think you're going to get a break, and you don't, and we'll probably get a little more, at least worrying about it. So thank everybody for that extra work. So.
The other point that if I could make is when I spoke with the National Weather Service, they've definitely said we're not out of the pattern that we're in. Luckily, as we get a little closer to March, the temperature starts to rise. But another way to think about it is we may be protecting the third week in June by accepting this recommendation. And then, because that was what the other feedback that I forgot to give is people started saying, we've got plans in June, and now we'd like to use those. So I thought I would just add that.
Mr. Jones.
So in my view, this is a management issue. You have an established process with a committee representing the community and the stakeholders. You've followed that process. It's not my job as a board member to second guess what's the best way to fulfill your two supreme mandates, which is one is to keep the kids safe and the other is to get them educated. So I vote with the plan that the superintendent recommends.
Mr. Brady?
Just one more point of clarification, because this could change my point of view on this, that we're talking about that if students already have pre-existing plans, or parents have pre-existing plans, like the one mom that I just spoke of, that's going to be an excused absence?
For example, a few Fridays ago, some parents decided to keep their children home when there was a questionable.
We were in session.
Yeah, we were in session, and it's at a principal's discretion in those cases to excuse those absences. I believe, as a former principal, if someone had this type of situation, that would definitely be an excused absence in my book.
In your book? Is there a way that we can, at a district level, put this policy for these 2 days, only these 2 days?
No. There is a state law that deals with, it's KRS 159035, and it deals with significant educational enhancements, and that's a decision to be made by the principal, citing certain standards within the statute as to whether that excused time allows for certain educational enhancements. So that's a decision that's got to be made on a case-by-case basis with the principals. It's not about just weather-related issues. It's a law that's been on the books for a few years now, and I think principals are well aware of how to handle it. So if there is some educational reason for students being gone, then I think if there's some educational enhancement to the trip, principals will know how to deal with that.
Okay. I'm just worried about, the mother that is taking their kids to go see grandma who may not be here a month from now. That's what I'm really, that's part of it. Custody issues, families that have already made a significant investment based on the word of this board. I should say the previous board, to a degree, but still we are now representative of those decisions as well. I just wanted to see, if we can at least strongly urge the principals to use extreme discretion in this particular issue.
And Ms. Duncan.
Well, I just was going to remind Mr. Jones that sometimes this board does not accept that recommendation from the calendar committee. For the past several years, the board has not accepted the recommendation of the calendar committee. So it doesn't have to.
Okay, so I think we've had good discussion, and we've had multiple emails, and I have tried to forward my emails to Dr. Razor, so we may all want to do that so he can create a file and know the concerns and try to be responsive to the communities that we serve. So we've had our discussion, and I'm ready for a motion. Please, Ms. Haddad.
Accept the superintendent's recommendation.
Okay, is there a second? Mr. Jones. All those in favor? Porter, Jones, Westland, Haddad, Brady. Those opposed? Ms. Duncan. Motion passes. Thank you so much. Okay, now we're moving down to the Board of Education discussion agenda planning calendar. Is that where we are? Okay. Any comments for the agenda planning calendar? Any comments? Hearing none, is there a motion to approve the planning calendar? Ms. Haddad, second. Ms. Westland, all those in favor? It's unanimous. Thank you very much. Board reports and requests. Board reports and requests.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Ms. Westland, did you have your hand up?
You go ahead. You go ahead.
Washington. Well, we fixed it. No.
That's right.
Just want to briefly report, Linda Duncan and I went to Washington last weekend, and we were part of about a dozen Kentucky board members and who visited Capitol Hill, and we had good visits. Just a few broad things that National School Board Association talked about that I thought was very refreshing to hear. They're focusing on communicating the good news of public schools, and that for so many years we've heard more negative than positive when there's a lot of positive going on. So we heard a lot about that, and that was very helpful. We had some great legislative presentations, and we talked mostly, and I think Linda and I added a lot to in our visits to our representatives and senators about funding needs, and we talked a little bit more about the local impact of Title I and IDEA, and what was the other one? And Head Start. You know, we were able to talk about the early learning progress, and that's because of the funding that we do get. So hopefully we made some impact there. It was a great time. NSBA is going to be doing some national advertising about public schools, and they have some pretty neat individuals to endorse public education, and the first one is Sal Khan of the Khan Academy. They'll be using his image and his words, and that he came from public schools and is pro-public school, and so that was really, I was glad to see that they're going to promote public education, because we have taken a beating, and sometimes, and certainly we need to be challenged, but we don't need to be kicked without kicking back. So that's what they're going to do. Linda, is there anything you'd add to that?
Well, I'd say the website that we can go to for local media communication of this whole promotion of public schools is called standupforpublicschools.org, and we brought badges that they gave us to wear around.
That's what these are for.
Standupforpublicschools.org.
Oh, and you've got little things to put your cell phone on here.
Yes,
that's
we brought you little
That's
gifts.
from NSBA, our expensive swag. So.
And that was one initiative. You know, the promotion was one initiative, and the other initiative had to do with their legal department, which NSBA has become much more aggressive in trying to defend against the overreach of the federal government into local issues. And they've challenged and won in, I know, Louisiana and Texas, in cases where the Department of Justice interprets the law, gives an opinion a certain way, and the NSBA lawyers stand up against that because they say that is not the meaning of that law, and they've managed to back them down 2 times, or at least 2 times that they talked about. So NSBA is becoming much more, I think, a force in the promotion of public schools, and understanding that they have to, because there is a constant attack that seems to have a lot of distortions in it, and public schools need to be standing up for themselves. Also, I know, we met. Usually when we go, we don't really get to meet always with the senators and the representatives, but this time we met with all of our representatives in Congress, Senator McConnell, Senator Rand Paul, Representative Yarmouth, and I met with Brett Guthrie, and then Ms. Westland. If you met, I don't know if you met with another one or not, but we were in 2 different teams, so we didn't go for some sessions. Right, Hal Rogers, right. So it was. I think it was a great time for us because we got to actually talk to them face to face on these things, and when Rand Paul began to talk about charter schools, it became very interesting for me, because I wanted to talk with him at length on some of those things. But also I wanted to announce that this past Saturday KSBA met, and the board of directors met and chose our new executive director, and he is a phenomenal person, but I cannot say anything about him until Thursday. He has to tell his staff, but he is it was the most amazing interview that I've ever been a part of, and I mean it was just an amazing experience. So anyway, he will take over in July, and they'll be announcing it, I think, on Thursday.
Very quickly, a couple of things I'd like to say, and I think Ms. Westland started it by talking about the staff that has been working so hard thanks to the weather. So I don't think we can say thank you enough, because there have been lots of people at work making sure that it's safe and that the buses can get around and get to the lots and people can walk to the school safely. So once again, I would like to say thank you to everyone, even the early risers and the late risers, everybody that has been out there. I know that I've gotten some texts like at 4:20 a.m., so everyone has been working to do what's best for our students and the staff. We couldn't do it without you, so I wanted to say that. And also to mention that we were at KSBA last weekend. Dr. Hargens was with us, and as a board, it was great to be there together to learn and to receive information. And along that line, I happened to pull out my KSBA calendar that they send us every year, and I wanted to highlight this picture because the photographer is Jonathan Roberts, who is our Jonathan Roberts, and it's in the calendar for May 2014. He's not here tonight, but hopefully someone will share with him that we know he does good work. We see it all the time, and it is in the calendar, so I just wanted to point that out. Are there any other board reports and requests? Okay. Mr. Jones.
I just want to say thanks to Ms. Westland and Ms. Duncan for representing us in Washington. I think it's important that local school boards do go and make their voices heard. So thank you all for doing that.
Thank you.
We do have two speakers tonight on non-agenda items. And the first, let me do the directions. Each speaker is allowed 3 minutes to address the board. At the end of 2.5 minutes, a bell will sound once. You will then have 30 seconds to finish your statement. At the end of 3 minutes, the bell will sound twice, indicating that your time is up. And it's my pleasure to introduce Ying, and I'm probably not saying this correctly, but she's here to talk about the Idea Fest. So welcome, and students at Manual High School, am I correct? Okay. Okay, please join us there or have a seat, whatever. Thank you for being here tonight.
All right, thank you all for giving us your time. It's been a relief hearing your dedication.
We need you to...
Thank you. All right, so it's been a relief hearing your dedication to our instructions and to our academic success every day, just at this board meeting alone. However, we're, as students of Manual High School, of this diverse high school that's a part of JCPS, we're concerned about student success, not just outside the classroom and in an instruction, but as Mr. Jones said, in an environment that stimulates real life. So to create this diversity and to take advantage of all of the diversity that our district has to offer, our school has expanded the Manual Idea Festival to include all of JCPS, the JCPS Idea Festival. And to make this event possible for all of our students, we want to personally invite you to be there with us on the 18th of April from 8:30 to 1:30. As the production members and students of Manual High School and of the district, we want your ideas from your schools, your administrators, and students on how we should make this event the best it can be for our entire district, and on whether you can send your students and your ideas there to be with us on the 18th. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here tonight. And it's April the 18th, 8:30 to 1:30. Is that correct?
8:30 to 1:30, exactly.
At Manual High School.
At Gaines Academy.
Okay, Gaines Academy.
Yes, so that we can accommodate more students from all around the area.
Okay.
We have these letters.
Thank you.
Just please don't let it snow.
We'll keep our fingers crossed. Maybe a little spring rain.
Oh, that's a whole. That's good. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being here tonight. It's a pleasure to meet you. Our next speaker is Carl Sitgraves. Mr. Carl Sitgraves. Carl Sitgraves. One last time, Mr. Sitgraves. That completes our speakers for the evening. We will not have an executive session. Is there a motion to adjourn? Ms. Haddad, second. Mr. Brady, all those in favor? It's unanimous. Thank you very much.